A magic spell?
No, a science spell.
Oh look, they did it. The worst episode of the season. How do I know it's worse than the episode that came out today that I haven't even seen yet? Because I'm pretty sure that this is not just the worst episode of the season, but it might be the worst Futurama episode I've ever seen. This isn't going to be some tirade about how I hated this and a bunch of the other Anthology episodes, but it is going to be about why I think this format keeps pumping out garbage. The Prince and the Product feels like it's the culmination of a series of strange decisions Futurama has been making since they stopped using the what-if machine as a framing device for their vignettes. It seems to have a lot in common with just about every existing anthology Futurama has done so far, which could have been a good thing if they properly executed the best elements of the anthology episodes. Instead, they did pretty much the opposite every single step of the way. So that's what we're going to talk about. Anthology of Interest 1 and 2, Reincarnation, Saturday Morning Fun Pit, Futurama Holiday Spectacular, and Naturama. We're going to discuss all of them. And I'm deeply sorry. Anthology episodes in general are a bit old hat, if you ask me, but it's not like the format is completely worthless, like the clip show. Do you remember when shows used to do that? Just have characters sit around and reminisce while interspersing jokes from previous episodes? At their core, clip shows and anthologies are obviously different formats, but there are some aesthetic and functional similarities that I think are worth pointing out. Both types, often, but not always, have a larger wraparound story that bookends the segments, whether they're new vignettes or shorter clips from previous episodes. They also often serve as a break from the typical vibe of the show. Both clip shows and anthologies are established TV tropes that have their own structure and almost seem to offer a little break to the creators, either allowing them to explore a little nonsense storyline or literally just replaying old clips and not writing anything at all.
Like some clip show from a bad sitcom, too lazy to come up with a fresh story.
Personally, I find both kind of boring, but I do think it's interesting when a show tries to put a fresh spin on the concept. Always Sunny in Philadelphia pulled this off perfectly in their clip show episode in season 13. Instead of just a straight clip show, they turned the idea on its head, having the gang misremember events or just make things up entirely, turning a traditional clip show into a series of new jokes while deconstructing the trope in general.
We can't even just sit around having memories without things getting out of hand.
Well, at least we're not being lazy, right? We're coming up with new stuff.
We see some of this exploration in the anthology space as well. Rick and Morty is pretty notorious for their interdimensional cable episodes, but truly broke the anthology mold with their aggressively meta Story Train episode. Of course, Futurama has put out enough of these anthology episodes to do a comparison within the show itself, but I just wanted to mention it up front that there are creative and interesting ways to execute on these types of episodes. I think there are flashes of this creativity in some past anthologies, but that has long since faded, and to be frank, what we're left with is an execution that is lazier than Sal.
What do I look like, a guy who's not lazy?
Being an anthology, the episode is divided into vignettes, 3 to be exact, which are separated by a larger wraparound story. So let's break this episode down like it's a Hot Wheels car at Zoidberg's Chop Shop and take a look at what went wrong. First thing we're going to do is separate the episode's wrapper narrative from those 3 vignettes. Don't worry, it'll be super easy. There is virtually no connection between the two, hence the unmotivated, whiplash-inducing transitions.
Futurama is brought to you by Windows.
So let's start right there, because a wraparound story isn't a given for a Futurama anthology episode. The Futurama Holiday Spectacular and Reincarnation skip the concept entirely, opting for 3 independent vignettes and nothing more.
That's all you get, jerks!
The other anthologies offer up a range of narrative devices to break up the stories, some better than others, all of them better than this shit.
Rubber ducks, a perfect toy for bath time.
So let's compare whatever the hell that was with its predecessors. We'll get to Naturama and Saturday Morning Fun Pit in a moment, but I wanted to get started with the What If Machine. The machine appears in both anthologies of interest, but I would argue the first episode uses the device much more effectively than the sequel. In the second iteration, the What If Machine is abandoned after the first 2 stories, when it knocks Leela out and her dream becomes the 3rd vignette. When we return to reality, the bookend includes a joke about organ harvesting, but the What If Machine is nowhere to be seen. We kind of just move on from the idea and meander into something else. Compare that to the original, where the what if machine plays a much more central role.
So that's what things would be like if I'd invented the thing longer.
This simple yet largely meaningless twist gives the what if machine added purpose in the wrapper narrative. It's just a fun little gag at the end, sure, but it makes the machine more than just a vehicle to tell otherwise unrelated stories. But once Anthology of Interest 2 rolls around, any attempt to do this is discarded. The bookend scenes are basically just transitions with jokes. While they both have their flaws, at the very least they're providing motivation for the transition. We're watching the what if machine with the characters, so cutting to the vignettes makes sense. We see a similar approach in Saturday Morning Fun Pit. The umbrella narrative has Nixon attempting to watch Saturday morning cartoons like Scooby-Doo, Smurfs, and G.I. Joe. While I'm not a huge fan of this episode overall, I respect their attempt to put a twist on the format in the final vignette. In an attempt to appease protesters speaking out against violence in cartoons, we get Nixon's head doing a real-time edit of G.I. Zap.
Today's episode, Operation Throat Banana Split.
We see something similar in Futurama. I've alluded to the fact that I'm not a fan of this episode in a previous video as well, but I can still appreciate what they're trying to do here with its wrapper narrative. The entire episode plays out like a Planet Earth style documentary called Wild Universe. Instead of jumping in and out of an in-universe screen for the vignettes, the stories are intertwined in the narration of the documentary. To the episode's credit, these vignettes have some of the most consistent theming, each one focusing on the life cycle of a different species. We'll get there in a moment, but first I just wanted to reiterate how clumsy the transitions are in The Prince and the Product. The transitions in the 4 episodes I mentioned are doing the bare minimum. They are providing some reason to shift from one narrative to another. Whether it's the what if machine, Nixon's TV, or just the next batch of animals to talk about, at least each of these episodes has motivated transitions.
Futurama is brought to you by Round Wheels.
And I haven't even touched on the actual narrative that's taking place here. Just the structure. The actual content, god damn is it garbage. Fry is ready to fight to the death so that Leela can marry a dude who is casting what is essentially a spell of infinite roofie. Look, for real, I don't think this Space King, Space Prince story merits really any discussion at all. It's just a forced callback to Overclockwise.
Pretty good. I just sold a castle to the King of Space.
So let's shift gears into the meat of these anthologies, the vignettes themselves. Each episode has 3 shorter self-contained stories. Sometimes there's a thematic link between them, sometimes it's merely aesthetic, and sometimes it's not there at all. The 3 minisodes within The Prince and the Product share an aesthetic connection of outdated toys, I guess, and have a very, very loose thematic link of death and reincarnation, if I'm being super generous. It is, of course, true that each vignette does involve the death and reincarnation of at least one of the characters, but the concept goes largely unexplored outside of the Windows segment.
Metaphor? Isn't that just a fancy word for steaming load?
I wouldn't call it fancy.
The Round Wheels segment involves death and I guess reincarnation through warranty. And the Rubber Duck one ends with Fry and Leela being reborn as the opposite toys after some weird Romeo and Juliet situation, I guess.
We believe a woman's sexuality is her own decision.
Okay then.
But I, as an individual, strongly disagree with that view.
I'll grant that each of these vignettes had at least one pretty decent joke,
That's not aerodynamic enough.
but to say they explored the theme of death and rebirth feels a little generous, especially considering how often death shows up in all of these vignettes. Basically, when the writers have an idea for a story that involves a main character dying, they seem to stash it away for an anthology episode. There have been a total of 7 of these episodes, each one containing 3 vignettes for a grand total of 21 of these minisodes, including this latest batch. 18 of those 21 stories, that's 86%, involve a main character dying. Anthology of Interest 1, we see Bender die in the first segment, Leela kill nearly everyone in the second, and Fry destroy the universe in the third. Anthology of Interest 2, Bender dies in the first segment again, Fry dies in the second, but does technically come back.
I had another guy!
And in the final segment, Leela turns a bunch of the crew into frogs and then melts. Each of the Holiday Spectacular segments ends with everyone, or just about everyone, dead. Naturama is literally about the animal life cycle and involves quite a bit of death throughout each of the vignettes. That's 4 anthology episodes where every one of the segments kills off key characters. 5 if you include Prince and the Product. The remaining anthologies, Saturday Morning Fun Pit and Reincarnation, have casualties as well, just not in every segment. The former kills off Zoidberg in the Scooby-Doo parody, and Freezerburn, is killed off at G.I. Zap. Also Kiff. Ironically, the episode titled Reincarnation has the fewest deadly segments of any of the anthology episodes. The first segment ends with everyone on Earth being encased in diamond, but the other 2 vignettes are death-free. As a quick aside, because I've been nothing but negative about all of these episodes, the pixel art in Reincarnation is excellent. It looks like they brought legitimate pixel artists in to work on this episode. The size of the pixels is consistent from image to image, the pixels aren't rotated, and the curves are pretty well crafted. I just wanted to point that out because I've done a good deal of pixel art myself, and I'm a huge fan of the art form. Sorry, the point is, everyone dying is the theme of every anthology episode, so it's tough to acknowledge it as a specific theme for this particular anthology episode. And in the spirit of this terrible episode, this transition is going to be very abrupt. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.